that. Now, in the meantime, staying in the UK, Charles, what's happening with homeschooling?
Well, quite a bit, or at least so we're led to believe by the government. And in particular, we're going to look at the gathering momentum in the attack on and the stigmatisation of home education, which follows Ben's excellent report on the manipulation of children to promote artificial intelligence and the dystopian virtual existence which can come with it. Now, referred to by Mike in last Wednesday's news was the new AI Playbook for the UK government. This has gone to the Department of Education, who should therefore be able to demonstrate that they know what AI is and its limitations. That comes from Principle 1. Principles 2 and 3 require the use of AI lawfully, ethically and responsibly, as well as knowing how to use AI securely. Most importantly, perhaps, educators should have meaningful human control at the right stage, prescribed by Principle 4. So for those in doubt about the Department for Education's motives, there is an ever-increasing trend in home education. And for the autumn term last year, the government believes there to be 111,700 children in what's described as elective home education. In the House of Commons at the moment, there are the Children Not in School Bill and the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, both of which intend to assume control of the lives of children on a level hitherto not seen. And the mechanism for pushing this agenda has been to conflate absenteeism, criminal activity, behavioural issues, mental health concerns, and the willful abuse of children with the practice of providing education for children in the home. The Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, now at the committee stage, is described by Education Otherwise, a home education charity, as conflating home education with safeguarding risk, despite there being no evidence that home education represents a risk to children. And in November last year, the Permanent Undersecretary at the Department for Education, Stephen Morgan, said the government will introduce compulsory children not in school registers in every local authority in England as part of the Children's Wellbeing Bill. This was in response to a question as to whether the Education Secretary will take steps to ensure that children remain in mainstream education rather than home education. Of interest is that this question came from Lee Anderson, an MP for Reform, indicating that party's views on liberty and freedom of choice. But during a debate on the register at Clause 24, Stephen Morgan doubled down and said it's necessary to have that requirement. It provides a check to ensure that home education is in the best interests of the child. But of course, what he really means is that the decision is to be taken by the state and in the interests of the state rather than the child or the child's family. And already stated within the government's guidance on elective home education, the council can make an informal inquiry to check your child is getting a suitable education at home. They can serve a school attendance order if they think your child needs to be taught at school. Now, articles such as this from the BBC create the lie that children who are not in school should be classified as home educated, hence the call for further safeguarding and control mechanisms. And to go alongside the creation of this register, the bill would introduce what's called a consistent identifier for certain children. The clause that deals with it in its current form says that the designated person considers that the inclusion of the consistent identifier is likely to facilitate the exercise by any person of a function of that person that relates to safeguarding or promoting the welfare of children. Now, if you followed that, then you'll consider that the idea of a consistent identifier, whilst it's been around for at least a decade, it's always been contested that though a digital record, it would not have any sensitive information attached to it, as it's only meant to be a mechanism by which children could be tracked through the system. But in the very unlikely event that it were to start as such, there can be very little doubt that it's the thin end of the wedge and brings about the normalisation of everyday activities being connected to a digital record, one of the purposes of digital identity, which Mike's going to cover more later in today's programme. But in this case, how many designated persons are not going to automatically insist that it's in the child's best interest to be branded in such a way in order to fulfil the so-called safeguarding element of their jobs? So this looks like a very short short step towards the possibility of enforced state intervention, supposedly in the child's best interests. We also have reports such as that by the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales submitted to the Education Committee inquiry into home education, which just adds fuel to the fire. And back in November 2020, they wrote that the Youth Justice Board has real concerns regarding the suitability of home education for some children, particularly those who are at risk of entering or who are already in the justice system. And this is really a blatant attempt to stigmatise home education by describing those who are either not at school or are involved in criminal activity as home educated. And this is how it's possible to drive the legislation to counter that apparent problem. The Youth Justice Board goes on to adopt the airport security philosophy by saying that time spent out of school, for whatever reason, is recognised to constitute a significant risk to children who are vulnerable to criminal exploitation. They did, though, concede that the Department of Education does not hold any data on the educational attainment of known home educated children in England, which seems a most significant omission. And to return to the start of this report, the Youth Justice Board report destroys any credibility it may have had by considering that, quote, one of the positive outcomes of the COVID-19 lockdown has been the education system's fast-paced adoption of virtual education technology. Although this method of education is not ideal, it could show potential for the development of future alternative support packages for children by reducing the need to exclude or home educate. A rather depressing picture, yes. I think. Now, if you're undecided on this issue, I would recommend reading Richard Morrissey's most recent piece in The Conservative Woman, describing the erosion of family identity and the appalling consequences for children as a result of exactly the virtual technology which the Youth Justice Board promotes. So I think a lot to think about, a lot more to talk about in extra on that. And if you've got any thoughts specifically on...
Well, it's we've published one article by Martin Edwards already on the issue of the use of exclusion in schools, and the way that children are being treated by schools in many, many ways. This is going to be followed up with 3 or 4 more articles in the coming days. And actually, there's quite a picture building here about the attack on children.
Yeah, I mean, it's very notable that, I don't want to sort of, overdo the point, but the BBC in particular, if you do search home education on the BBC, it is absolutely phenomenal, the number of different ways in which they can say that there is something wrong with everybody that is home educated, and indeed those that choose to do it for their children. Quite phenomenal propaganda.
Yes. Okay. Let's move on. If you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, support.ukcolumn.org is the place to go. We do need your ongoing financial support. You can make a donation or join as a member. You'd be very welcome. And there are various membership levels there, but pick something up at the UK Column shop if you can as well, or buy something from clive2carl.com. We get a small commission on sales so long as you use the link that's on this page. But if you can't do any of that, please do share our material, because we are still, of course, subject to censorship on the various platforms, despite what you may have heard about X in particular. And so we do have links there for you to help with that. Another reminder of Saturday, the 5th of April, 2025 in Cheltenham. Please do join us for that. Tickets going very fast. And we're looking forward to seeing everybody at it. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., Brian will be speaking this is part 2 of 2 entitled "Child Stealing by the State: A Mother Criminalised for Speaking Out." Now, this interview is part of a series, which is going to be, there are going to be many more of these over the next period, which cover template cases of child snatching by the state, also where the children are abused in the care of social services. I think that point that Brian would be very keen to make here is that mothers and fathers are trusting the UK Column to bring forward their cases and their evidence. But we do want to make it clear to everybody contacting the UK Column, we are a small team. We often can't respond or react immediately, but we're dedicated to exposing this state-sponsored crime, and we're fighting hard for the parents suffering within that abusive system. And so just stick with us. We are going to get these stories out. Now, yesterday, Ben was speaking to Rosie Marshall on her efforts to bring and highlight the situation of people damaged by COVID vaccines in Australia. If you haven't seen that, it's on the website now. Please do go have a look at it. Another reminder of Public Child Protection Wales conference taking place on the 22nd of February. Lots of great speakers at that. Support Kim Esherwood if you possibly can. And also that's if you're in Wales, of course, or close to Wales. If you're in Scotland or close to, you can head up to Edinburgh for the Scottish People's COVID-19 inquiry. That's taking place also on Saturday the 22nd. I'd get along to that if you possibly can. And one more ad here.
Yes, Sunday the 16th of March, just outside Cheltenham, Farmers Force Security Symposium. So really getting to the heart of how to address your own personal situation and how to develop relationships with farmers and deal with the very real issue of food security in a way that the government is completely unable to. And that will involve a great range of speakers, some of whom the UK column audience will be familiar with, including Sandy, and I will be comparing the event. So get your tickets now.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you.